So looking historically at the role of the IBD nurse, it started around 20 years ago with a nurse called Sheila Phillips. And this was the first documented role of an IBD nurse. Moving on around 10 years, there's definite momentum to raise awareness of the profile of IBD nursing. And Crohn's and Colitis UK conducted a bursary nomination. I'm not sure whether some of you remember this, where patients and healthcare professionals were asked to nominate their IBD nurse. In this slide here, you can see some of the things that patients said about the importance of the IBD nurse. So always there, time to listen, a supportive link, honest advice, and I think that really embodies a lot of the role of the nurse. Just to show you a typical IBD service, we've got a service at the Royal Free Hospital. We've recently merged with Barnet and Chase Farm, but this particular slide shows the services at the Royal Free site. There's 3 IBD nurses, 6 gastroenterologists. We've got 3 IBD outpatient clinics, 2 telephone clinics and an advice line. We do a lot of inpatient work, and a vast majority of our role is involved in coordinating the biologics service. So ensuring that funding is in place for infliximab and Humira and the latest drugs that are available, making sure that all the screening tests are done, and just ensuring safety really prior to patients starting on these treatments. There's a lot of role involving research and audit, and we also do teaching as well. Over the years, there has been development of a national IBD nurse network, and I think this is really important, particularly as an IBD nurse, to support our role. It works on a kind of a hub and spoke system where you've got lots of different regional groups that plug into a national group, and we offer each other support, advice, education, sharing best practice. If for example, I have a question or want information, I'll email it round and it'll go to all the IBD nurses that we have contact details for in the UK, and we can share ideas and get information in a timely manner. And I think this particular, the next part, which is the IBD Nurse Awareness Project, this is something that at the moment is in its infancy, and it came about from a post which was put on the Crohn's and Colitis UK Facebook page, and it was in response to the thing that David presented earlier, where it was found that a lot of patients value the IBD specialist nurse, and that's one of the top things that they want to get seen taken forward in the NHS. And so a question was posed saying, how many people do not have an IBD nurse? And it was quite surprising the amount of people that didn't still have a nurse, but also the number of centres the number of patients who did have an IBD nurse but didn't realise it. So there were patients from certain hospitals saying, oh, I don't have an IBD nurse. And then somebody else saying, oh, no, we do have one, and this is her contact details. So I think this has then led to maybe thinking we need to do a lot more work into promoting the role and promoting, what centres do have nurses. And so we're looking into how to do that. Going forward, 2006, there was a systematic review commissioned which looked at showing evidence for the role of the nurse. So instead of just saying, yes, there are nurses available, what is the evidence of the worth of the nurse to promote it? And this basically demonstrated that the nurse is a good quality kind of role. It's important for IBD care, but we need to have a lot more publicised evidence as to the value of the role. The first national IBD audit was performed in 2006, and it's now gone on for the last one in 2012. And what this basically did was to look at the standards of care across all participating trusts in the UK based on a series of parameters, and it was supported by a lot of different departments, including Crohn's and Colitis UK. And this here focuses specifically on the IBD nursing provision that was identified in the audit. And you can see from 2006, where the provision was only 56% of trusts in the UK had any sort of IBD nursing provision, the numbers increased, and at the last audit it was 86%. And I think that's a lot in part of the national IBD standards that were published as a result of the audit, and also promotion and drive from organisations such as Crohn's and Colitis UK to raise awareness of the role. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because David's already commented on this in his last presentation, but I think the main thing that we need to take from the national IBD standards is the fact that they recommend 1.5 IBD nurses per 250,000. Some trusts are exceeding that, whereas others don't meet it at all, and I think that is something that we need to look at in the future. Again, my Crohn's and colitis care, I'm not going to dwell on this too much because it was covered really well in David's previous presentation. In 2012, there was a national IBD nurse audit, and this was an audit done of all IBD nurses in the UK. So a questionnaire was sent out to 240 IBD nurses, asking them to take part. 196 actually took part in it, and it was a two-phase audit. First, looking at the roles of nurses throughout the UK, the titles and the responsibilities. And the second part of it was a 2-week snapshot of the clinical activity. So what do we as nurses do in kind of a day-to-day work? And it was interesting to see the amount of differences in the role. Some nurses focus just on IBD, whereas other nurses do inflammatory bowel disease as an extra part of their job, such as a nurse endoscopist or a gastroenterology nurse. The majority of services do have an IBD nurse advice line, and in the 2-week period, there were 6,500 calls to the IBD advice line, which shows how much of a valuable service it is that we run. And it also looked at, over the year period, how many IBD contacts the nurses had. And this is from outpatient clinics, inpatients, biologics, advice line, and there was close to 29,000 estimated IBD contacts. So I think it just demonstrates the integral role that the IBD nurse has in the service. More recently, there's been the development of a European-wide guidance, or consensus should I say, on the role of the IBD nurse. And this was developed by the European Crohn's and Colitis organisation, and it's a document that's available on their website for kind of anyone to look at. And it basically looks at not just the role of the IBD nurse specialist, but also looks at the role of any nurse who you might come into contact with as part of your kind of pathway through diagnosis. So nurses who work in endoscopy, nurses in outpatients, nurses that you might find on the ward. And I've just given here a couple of the statements that are included within the consensus document. So this first statement is relevant to all nurses who you would come into contact with. And it shows that communication is essential, that nurses need to listen, which we have heard from kind of the IBD sufferers that have presented today. And also that it's essential that they at least have a baseline knowledge of inflammatory bowel disease so that they can give information and provide support. The document then talks about the advanced IBD nurse as being an autonomous nurse. And you've seen a lot of development recently in the roles of the IBD nurse. Nurses taking a lot more roles such as endoscopy, prescribing, and doing things such as physical examination. And I've highlighted the key things that I feel are essential as an IBD nurse or somebody who looks after people. So you need to be empathy, listening. You need to have a holistic approach, so don't just look at the inflammatory bowel disease and the symptoms, look at the wider picture. You need to be an expert, look at evidence-based care and ensure that what we do as nurses is founded on the best possible research. And particularly, I think this says here that the IBD nurse provides a pivotal and important role in the care of the IBD patient. And it's not just for the patient, it's to support the MDT and wider community. And finally, I just want to share this with you. Now, this is a picture that one of our patients drew, an artist, and he drew this while he was an inpatient. And it was his perception of IBD and the care that he receives. And so I kind of point it out here. So you can see at the top you've got a house, and it's a crumbling house. And that's how he depicted himself and the Crohn's disease and the effect that it has on him. And you can see at the top left-hand side there's a little figure that's leaping from one side to the other. And he said that that was the way that he feels, leaping from periods of good health to ill health. And like what was described earlier, like a ticking time bomb, really. And what he said was that the stilts that are depicted in the picture are the IBD team that support him and that kind of prop everything up and help to keep him well during times of being ill. And I think that this is just a really powerful image that just shows how inflammatory bowel disease can affect people and the kind of support that is essential that we give as healthcare professionals. Thank you.